All right. Welcome, guys. Justin and Bryce to the S2G podcast. Justin, you've been here before. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Bryce, is your first time. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Well, maybe just before we get into the future of American agriculture, sort of the state of the world, maybe even spring planting and how that's going, and sort of where we are from a farmland perspective. Maybe just backgrounds, like who are you and why are you here?
Who do you want to go first?
Justin, you go.
Okay. Sanjeev, S2G, thanks for having me today for your podcast. So I'm Justin Bruch. I live in just outside Omaha, Nebraska. I'm a fifth generation farm kid from Northwest Iowa. I spent about 11 years abroad farming, 7 years in Ukraine with an extensive amount of work in West Africa as well while I was there on farming stuff, and then about another 4.5 to 5 years in Canada building a farmland portfolio for CPPIB at an institutional level, and then founded Clear Frontier with S2G and your team in 2019. And so we're a farmland fund based out of Omaha, Nebraska, where we buy farmland with predominant focus of transitioning it over to certified organic through long-term leases and helping tenants get to organic and stay organic so that we can focus on the impact of soil health and the transition from conventional to organic ag, as well as try to take advantage of the demand side of organic. So I believe we're a farmer-centric group that is focused on the farmer side, and I still farm part of the family farm as well today, which is about majority of that's organic with a little bit of conventional on it. So that is me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you guys for having me as well. My name is Bryce Irlbeck. I grew up in western Iowa on a conventional corn and soybean farm, about 600 acres, not enough to even support one person. It ended up going to Iowa State University for agriculture. And during that time, I spent time in Brazil, went to college down in Brazil, made friends down there, and was able to jump into the agriculture down there. Then, as well as continue down there with friends, visiting, understanding what's going on, investing down there as well. And spent some time in Tanzania, Africa on a 12,000 acre rice farm. So we were there as they were trying to launch that. We were there as consultants and spent about 7 months there as well doing that. And then came back to the family farm, as discussed earlier. It was 600 acres. It wasn't viable. And so I looked around at what made the farm viable if I ever wanted to come back. And that was turning it organic in 2015, about the same time Justin Bruch started in the organic space as well. That's how we all met. And we took that farm in 2015 from 600 acres to we're about 10,000 acres now, almost all organic, a lot of it regenerative. We focus on food grade. So we have corn that goes into a bag of chips that we're heavily invested in the company with, that goes to Costco, Whole Foods, all over the country. We're looking at building an organic dairy, breaking ground this year. We have the whole family back on the farm. My mom, dad, my brother-in-law, we have extra employees. So I think one of the themes that you'll see today out of us is this was the way to save the farm and keep it in the family and allow us to be a family farm again.
Well, thank you both. Well, how common is it for two farm kids from Iowa to go to Brazil and Africa? And I guess, Justin, in your case, is this a common thing, or are you guys uncommon in your worlds?
Yeah, I think Justin and his brother Tyler were pioneers of being the younger people to go out into different countries and understand what is going on. I was a little bit later, and it was just getting started as I was going to Brazil and Africa. Now I think it's more prevalent because people realize the value of that. One thing I would suggest is people go down to those areas and understand agriculture, because agriculture is a world production, and understanding how big Brazil is, how efficient they are, how good the managers are, quite frankly. It has a lot of effect of, as Justin talked about, why we do stuff in the United States today and what and how we do it.
That's a good segue to sort of the first topic that I want to get into, which is sort of the, you know, the past is typically not the future, although most people tend to cut and paste statistics and correlations from the past. But if I think about, and tell me how wrong this is, but if I think about the last 30 years, particularly maybe 25 years at least, you've had sort of two big super cycles that I think American agriculture has benefited from. And one has been China pork demand and sort of soy going to China, and then two, ethanol. Those two big super cycles have influenced acreage, the commodity business model of agriculture. Do you guys agree with that? And is there a third or a fourth that you'd put in there?
I'll let you go, Justin.
So I agree on the China pork. I think it's significant. I think ethanol is significant when you look at the numbers of, I don't think we're far from 50% to the U.S. corn crop going into ethanol today. You look at the United States, and we're going to grow ballpark 90 million acres of corn, 90 million acres of soybeans in this country. And you look at half of that going into ethanol. And then the export side that we've had on the soybean side in order to feed pork in China from a protein standpoint, hugely significant. I think the third trend that we're in the cusp of today that hasn't happened to there's another one you put in there, and you could go back into the early 90s of glyphosate and Roundup Ready soybeans, and that change in what it did for the change in the overall farming system is kind of like you have to step almost back to Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution to find another blip in the system of what changed us. But I think today, if you look at ag and you look at the focus on soil health, which comes into the regenerative, the organic, it's what you see out of Maha. Look at nitrogen prices today and cost of inputs and what's going on, and then look at consumer demand. I think that's the next frontier that we're looking at today, that it is happening right now, and it's a snowball effect starting to roll. So I see that as one that's coming in front of us next. I don't know, will it be as big as Roundup Ready or China pork or ethanol?
Maybe.
I can't say, but I think
Yeah. The other thing I was going to throw in there, Justin, and Bryce, maybe you react to it, was also the advent of cheap shale gas that led to very attractive urea prices for a while. Is that another one, Justin, in your view, that led to?
It is. We saw effective price of inputs for a very long time, which made your ability to produce corn sub $4 conventionally to have people be able to make it economically viable. But we've seen a whole change of that in this input complex. Now, some of that is short term, but ultimately, since the run up, really post COVID there, from an inflationary standpoint, our cost of production, our cost of equipment, everything has skyrocketed. We made things very tight. Bryce, is there anything on there we're missing or that
I'd add one thing from a farmer standpoint: the policy. So if we look back to 2000, you pick your number, and crop insurance started to come in, and all the policy, all the government programs pushed people into two crops, and they locked them into two crops. It's very hard not to grow corn or soybeans as a farmer that borrows from the bank, that needs crop insurance to borrow from the bank and buy his inputs and all that. And it's sad, but most farmers are locked into doing that, even if they wanted to do something better or do a rotation or do something else, they just can't. And that's what we've broken on our farm. We grow multiple different crops. I don't really care what insurance is anymore. We use it, don't get me wrong, but it is what it is. We're going to grow what's best for us, not what's best for insurance in the bank. And that policy, up until the last few years, has been driven to corn and soybeans. And now I think we're starting to see a gradual shift in a policy where maybe that isn't the best thing, to just have the government funnel people into corn and soybeans.
You're talking to like my favorite topic in agriculture, which is credit and risk management. But we'll get into that later. I'm of the view, and this is meant to be challenged, but those 5 things, though, I think are fundamentally that commodity system that we grew up with in American agriculture, I believe is fundamentally under threat, just driven by perhaps China and Brazil, Argentina, and soy dynamics. Justin, your views of consumers, perhaps choosing or wanting a different thing. Third is the profitability of that. We were so much on a yield per acre, but as more and more acres get rented, maybe we're gonna have to focus on profit per acre, just given how that. Do you guys feel like, I've told this to Justin, like we're in need of a new grand strategy, because the grand strategy the last 30 years ain't gonna work for the next 30, just given some of the things I described, and perhaps others. Agree, disagree?
So I would agree. I think this is one of those times in life where you can look back and say, well, I don't think what we've done in the past, if we're just going to continue doing, is going to work the same way. When you look at Brazil and you look at the infrastructure going out to the west and their ability to get to China and what they're producing in a double crop basis, and ultimately, for the most part, their price of land, that is going to completely change that dynamic. So there's some significant changes that are going to have to happen in the system, and I would argue and this falls back a little bit to the policy side, and farmers won't like to hear this, and so this will be offensive to some, and I apologize, but we are working our way towards being just a subsidized operator for a system. And Europe is a heavily subsidized agriculture system on what their subsidies are. And there is a lot of farmers last year that I think the only probably profit they made was the fact that we got bridge payments through the government. And it's not the farmer's fault. We have to figure out a way to do something different so that we actually have better markets, and you go out and make a living doing what you are doing without relying on a government payment to come to you. But that is partly, back to Bryce's point in the policy side, partly where we've been driven to on corn and soybeans in the system we're in. So in a long, short answer is yes, I would agree with you. The next 30 years in agriculture,
we're in danger of a common agriculture policy 2.0.
Yeah.
Correct. That's what I think. So I think we've got to, the next 30 years has got to look different than the last 30 years in my perspective. Bryce, what do you think?
Yeah, from a farmer's side point of view, it's if corn's $7, a bag of corn is $400 to plant, and nitrogen's $1,000, and that actually hasn't came down, and so the policy that we've put in place to allow 2 to 3 seed corn companies control the market. You allow 1 to 2 nitrogen people to control the market, and it's just not fair anymore. And they got there through policy. They didn't get there through that they were just better at everybody supplying nitrogen. The patent laws allow a seed company now to definitively keep a patent on seed for a pretty long time. And I don't think that is the way we intended our policy to be. That's the way it turned out. And so I think we're in a lose-lose situation as conventional farmers, that the policy is just going to keep riding along with the big ag, and eventually it'll be subsidized, as Justin talked about.
So, and I'm hearing you say a little bit, and I'll be more provocative than you both. So the business model of buying retail, selling wholesale can only work if you have common agriculture policy 2.0.
Yeah.
Fair. I would say that is a fair common policy.
I think it's a fair assessment.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone that has studied common agriculture policy like I did in college when I was at school thinks that's the ideal system.
No.
So I'm sure there's protagonists that will argue why that is working in Europe, but I think the American agriculture system can do better.
There's that great JFK quote: "The farmer buys everything at retail, sells everything at wholesale, and pays the trucking both ways." It was true in the 60s when he said it. It's true today. It's not a good system for where we look for the next 30, 40, 50 years in ag.
So that's how we got to where we're going to. Let's talk about where we're going. Justin, and maybe paint your visions of where, just if you were talking to the Senate Ag Committee and sort of the future Farm Bill architects, if you're talking to innovators, you're talking to capital markets, what is your sort of vision or formula for where American agriculture goes?
Bryce, you go first on this one.
This
I know
is a
you
big
got
question. I mean, it's a very big question. Uh, I think it starts with the monopolies that we have in agriculture, and how do we break them? And look, I think everybody should have a business and make as much money as possible. So let's break them in a business wise. We grow 90 million acres of corn, 90 million acres of soybeans. If we look at a different world, and maybe the government has to subsidize through the process, don't get me wrong, but let's just say we turn 10% of our acres into wheat that grows a cover crop that produces nitrogen, that we need 10% less combine power, 10% less tractor power, 10% less chemicals. And we change the system to not be as heavily reliant on those monopolies. We could break those monopolies down and efficiently get back to a more leveraged place, or less leveraged place for the farmer. So, example, we grow wheat in Iowa. We spent $13 billion given away from the government. If we turned a third of the wheat in Iowa and subsidized it to profitability, it costs us, I think, around $7 billion. So we're already paying this money out. Why not do something good with it rather than promote more corn and soybeans?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that on how we're using government money and where it ends up going. I think from an innovation and from an ag standpoint, we have got ag in the U.S. pigeonholed into this corn and soybean component, and then we're very pigeonholed into what is our market offtake demand. And so you take the ethanol side, and then you look at oil and gas and competition on that side, and now the competition in South America. We have put ourselves into a box, and in that box, to Bryce's point, you've got a few seed suppliers. You've got three basically major equipment suppliers that own the entire market. So you've almost got monopolies based around, and then you've got a whole bunch of independent people that are out trying to farm that are ultimately price takers. They're not price makers. They get told what the price is off of CBOT, and that's what it is. And so it's pretty constricted in that basis. If I was sitting in front of Ag Committee, I think for me, it would be around how do we either figure out, we've got to figure out better uses for our demand. There's a lot of things that I agree with the current administration. There's a lot of things I don't agree with. I like the idea of trying to figure out how we can use more of our own products in our own country and find better uses for them. So I think we've got to figure out a component on that. But I think we've got to innovate to change the way that's going forward. We've got the average age of the U.S. farmer is 59 and a half. The USDA says we're going to trade 30% of farmland in the next 10 years. So you're going to see this enormous shift in agriculture of the ownership of farmland, whatever, a $2.2 trillion asset class in the United States. You see this enormous shift in farmland ownership, and you're going to see a shift in the farmers and the operators doing it. And it's going to be people Bryce's age or my age and younger that are going to be holding that torch going forward. So there's a big shift coming. I wish I had the answer to say, here's the 5-point plan or the 10-point plan of what we're going to do in order to make that all happen. I don't honestly know. I don't honestly know exactly how we're gonna solve the issue of farmers to do it, how that change is going to be converted, and ultimately, at the end of the day, how you do it so that the American farmer does not have to be a massive size farm operation to be able to make a living, support their family, support their local community, and continue to be successful. The American farmer is the greatest entrepreneur, in my opinion, there is, because they're typically out there. They're their banker, they're their accountant, they're the agronomist, they're the mechanic, and they're working night and day throughout from early spring until late fall, as well as they're doing their marketing. So there's a lot there, and you got to figure out a way for someone that's wearing that many hats. How do they continue to be successful so they can carry on doing it? Because without them, you're either going to see a huge rise in food prices or you're going to have famine, neither of which is probably good for the world today.
Maybe I can take a stab at the 5-point plan or the 10-point plan, Justin.
Yes.
Because I think it involves a number of things, but at its root, it's about how do you get more cash flow from these real assets that are inflation hedged, uncorrelated, whether you own the land or rent the land. But like, I think my sense is you've got to think about there's going to be and you tell me because you guys are the experts, there could be a K-shaped and that could be okay. Like you have a bunch of commodity people that do commodity things and they're going to consolidate and there's going to be, it's going to look slightly Brazil style, but not to the scale of Brazil, maybe, and they're going to be able to make their utilization of farm machinery, their scale, that could work. But then you've got this other end that's going to be specialty focused, less yield per acre focused, but more profit per acre for us. Kind of what you guys have done already in the organic space and other things that you all are doing. And if we can accept that, there's going to be a segment of the market that's going to be highly consolidated, significant acres, and a segment of the market that's more specialty. I think then you've got the makings of a plan, whether it's innovation, there's innovation for the, new genomics, new cash cover crops, new specialty seed that goes into unique niche markets. And then you need the financial system to finance that so that the current financial system doesn't veto, lending and risk for you guys. And then you've got the merchandising aspect of it, which I think between GLP-1 and the new consumer and kind of traceability and a bunch of things that make, I think animal protein is going to be more specialty and that's going to provide potentially some tailwind. And then on top of that, you've got the opportunity to make agriculture from, and this may sound controversial, from extractive mining to regenerative mining, i.e. soil health, and building that up. And that allows you to think, like, does this sound far-fetched, or do you think do you have a different way that this could go down practically?
Your components of that are spot on. I mean, how you find specialty markets or how you find a way to make money and also limit cost. And, to the listener of this, we need conventional agriculture to feed. Conventional ag feeds planet Earth at the end of the day. I mean, we grew 90 million acres of corn in the United States last year, or 87 million acres. We grew about 440,000 acres of organic corn. Put that in perspective. Like, it is what feeds the vast majority of the chickens, the dairies, the beef that we all consume on a daily basis or go into your food supply. So I'm not saying we don't have to have it, and it has to stay there and it has to continue. Where the opportunity lies today in agriculture is where you find those components of, to Bryce's point, I don't know, he didn't know conventional corn prices. Well, you know what, when you look at a conventional corn price of around $4.27 Chicago, and you look at an organic price of $9.50, that's why Bryce is not so worried about it, because he's going to be profitable at $9.50 plus corn in what he's doing. So finding something where you can change your need for relying on urea fertilizer at a high cost because you're using a manure or a compost or a different way of getting fertility or right cover crops, and then figuring out a way to get a premium for it. That comes back to my entrepreneurial piece. That's the greatest entrepreneur there is how do I find a way to go find a different way to do something that everybody else is doing and make more money on it. And I think that is the revolving change. And it may not all be organic. Maybe it is more regenerative or more ways to figure out, or maybe it's technology driven on how we figure out to use more of the biologicals to reduce what we need for nitrogen at a much lower cost. But there's a change going to happen, and it's going to have to come in the coming years for this engine to continue to run.
And
we talked. Oh, go ahead, Bryce.
yeah, I'll add in there just on your 5-point plan. Then I go back to policy because it's the hardest part about organic is the government. We were, I would say, because of lack of better words, attacked by the USDA when we went organic by the rules and policy that were in place. And, it wasn't the people there. You can't tell, you can't do this. Well, they really limited our freedom to earn in terms on different pieces of land that we have and tried to do that. And now that's kind of gone away. So I think policy, if people are listening out there, to let people do the right thing. Most farmers will do the right thing. Most farmers will try to do better. And government policy gets in the way quite a bit of times. And I don't think it's meant to, but it does.
So we talked about the last 30 years and some of the potential models for the next 30 years, mainly being specialty focused or maybe K-shaped, but specialty providing a big profit pool. Small base to your point, Justin, but real opportunity to go from yield per acre to profit per acre. And a lot of my friends are in buyout and private equity and middle market. Private equity has been a darling for allocators. But it's reliant on not just, buy low, sell high. It's often reliant on leverage. And that leverage is getting more expensive and driving less alpha, in my opinion. And so if you look at a lot of the drivers, and then, demographics, big challenge, right? We're aging massively globally. The question is, what do you do? And maybe, Justin, I want you to bring into this is, I believe there's a role for diversifiers. And the diversifiers we have today, if you're an asset allocator, is really gold, silver, Bitcoin, all three of which have a lot more volatility than what you'd want in a diversifier. And perhaps they're inflation hedges, perhaps not, TBD a little bit, because we've had such a stable inflationary regime up until COVID, from Volcker to COVID. But curious your thoughts about, because you spend a lot of time with allocators and investors, how do you think about the role of diversifiers?
I think the only one you missed, you said gold, silver, Bitcoin. I think you should have added farmland to that. I think that's
that's what I want to talk about.
Fourth component that you missed in there. There's some things in there with diversifiers. Like when you look at the 1980 farm crisis that the United States went through, and you look at that side, and then you look today, the debt to equity ratio is about 13.5% on U.S. farmland. And that basically tells us that, I would argue, you're not going to have a 1980s farm crisis in farmland, even at high interest rates, which we saw interest rates, whatever, in the 19-20% back at that point. You're not going to see that just because your equity is so much better across the nation from a ownership standpoint versus a debt standpoint. And you look at farmland, and you look at its returns, and the fact that you can go out and buy a real asset of something you can see, feel, and touch that produces a crop that
heavy asset, low obsolescence, as they say
absolutely
now. Halo.
Yes, and it produces something that we can eat and consume on a daily basis. It's an appreciating asset, unlike a building that's a depreciating asset. It appreciates, and it has since the Second World War on a long-term trend. And so, to me, as I look at this market, I'm thinking, if you run that through ChatGPT and you do that gold comparison of an ounce of gold and an acre of Iowa farmland, and for 100 years, and you run that out, you basically come out of them being at about a parity. However, farmland has produced you somewhere between a 2.5% and a 4.5% cash yield for 100 years, where gold, in that theory, sat in your gun safe without providing a dividend. So, as I look at farmland and I look at all of the things going on in the market, I think it's one of the most stable places you can go put money and hold an asset that produces a dividend, and that is an inflation hedge in the market today. And I can't decide if I'm just overly biased because it's what I do for a living, or if I'm missing something here. But to me, when I look at that, I think it is the right place for a long-term investment. And I think you can look at a family office might say, hey, I want to be in private equity because I want to flip this company every 5 or 7 years and it's going to be a higher return, which, to be fair, it is going to be a higher return. If you can do that right, then you're going to get in farmland. I mean, farmland is appreciated about 5.25% on the 25, 50, and 75-year long-term average. So you can look at that and say, if I'm a family office, do I want to be in something I can flip out in 7 years? The answer might be yes. Or you can look at it and say, do I want something that I can hold for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years that is going to continually produce a long-term appreciation and produce something that the world needs? And if I put the right operators on it, I can improve it over time as well. I think it's a very bullish case as you look at differentiators of parking money as a long-term investment versus, let's
Justin,
say,
can I challenge you on one thing?
Yep.
I totally buy all of that, and obviously I gave you a softball to tee you up to the farmland thesis.
It was a curveball, man.
Curveball. Softball, curveball, whatever. I do want to press on one thing on the appreciating asset bit. Is all of it appreciating, or do we need to change? Like, at some point, it is my view that soil organic matter increases, and sort of the durability, particularly if you think about water issues, heat issues, other just climatic events, like the resilience, and like just as simple as the cation exchange that you know better than me as an agronomist, like the water holding capacity, like, is it all appreciating, or are there some that are going to be much more resilient and therefore better, more durable appreciators within farmland?
So I would say today in the market, the market trades off of a comp base today, no different than a house trades in town off of comps around it for comparables. I believe that market will change as you talk about changes in the next 10, 20, 30 years going forward. I believe that is going to change, in that it's going to trade off of productivity, and productivity is based off of soil quality. And today farmland does trade off productivity. To be fair, if you've got a 90 CSR in Iowa, it's going to trade better than a 40 CSR is, because it is more productive. But as you look at higher quality and better performing farm ground, soil organic matter, you look at that, for every 1% of soil organic matter, you're going to hold about 30 pounds of free nitrogen that's available to plants. Nitrogen is going to be your most needed nutrient. Today it's your most expensive. You're also going to hold about 20,000 gallons of usable water from a cation exchange standpoint that plants can take up. Water is going to be absolutely crucial for us as we look at the next 30 years out and we look at where that sits. So yes, to your point, I believe improving soil organic matter and improving soil health and having the right water is going to be the differentiator. The last piece on this, and then I'm going to shut up because I know I've done a lot of talking here, is if you looked at the state of Iowa, 1850s, people are coming across in a covered wagon. Your soil organic matter on average is going to be about 7%. That's about your plateau of where it's at. Today, let's say we're maybe a 3% average if we're lucky. So we've degraded 400 basis points in 150 years of soil organic matter. And if you revert back to what I just said about pounds of nitrogen and available holding water capacity, that's what we've basically have degraded off. So improving that and changing that is your future of using less inputs, producing a bigger crop, and having a better asset value.
Bryce, I called Justin on Saturday. I was like, we got to write a bipartisan piece on like how to improve rural America, and get more money and flows into rural America. If that happens, one of the things I get questioned a lot is, things like the word corporate farming, tenant farming, and how should money, if it shows up in your part of Iowa or other parts of rural America, show up? I mean, because I think there is this hesitation or concern of like, if capital starts to flow, whether it's to farmland or to other things that finance this stuff, what is or is that just a made up hesitation? Like, people in rural America want capital to come. They want to partner with capital.
Yeah, I think, are we talking about capital for land or capital for the other towns and everything involved in that?
Either, both. Maybe just differentiate however you think.
Yeah, I think the worst way capital shows up is government programs. I think for the value of the farmer, the way he thinks about himself, everything, everybody accepts it. I accept it. I'm not above that, so I don't want to put there. But it sucks to get that. It sucks to have your living based on that. So I think the value of farmland and the value of the work and the value you create, you should get paid on. That's the best way for money to show up in small towns, to show up in rural America, is to actually get the value that you're creating. And you're creating probably the second most valuable thing on this earth, other than waters, protein and food. And our policy and everything that has been created in the last 20, 30, 40 years has been to take that value out of the small town, to kill that small town, crush that small town. So I go back to answer your question. If we just had a fair marketplace, I think capital would flow into those small towns.
And maybe Justin, what are the options today for owning farmland? You know, how do you partner with farmers? I think you do it very differently in a way that is in partnership, but I'm biased too.
Yep.
But like, give us the state of the state on farmland
Yeah.
ownership and where we are today.
Yeah. So for someone's ability to go buy farmland, there's several different paths you can go about it. You can go out and just go. There's land for sale all the time. You can go out and find a farm for sale and buy it and own that and rent it to a local farmer. Farmland's a unique asset class in that there's a zero vacancy. You don't drive past a nice farm and see it growing the weeds because no one decided to rent that like you would a house in Chicago or Omaha. So a farmer can go out and someone can just go out and buy that asset, hold that title in their name or in an LLC and rent it. If you got a group that wants to go do it, and that farmer could rent it themselves, or they can go to a third-party company and say, manage this asset for me and do that. It's pretty turnkey. The second option is you'll have certain groups that want to go out and hold that through like an SMA or an SPV, where they want to be able to go out and maybe put a larger investment amount of $50 million or $100 million and say, hey, go out and buy me this certain number of farms, hold them and manage them for me. And so that's a path. You can do it through a fund. So for something like what we do, you got a collaboration of people that come into it, and we buy it, manage that, hold it for them, and do a turnkey on it all the way through for that period. So there's multiple different paths of ownership, and there's ownership for someone that wants to be in row crop production. There's ownership of people that want to have a ranch land that they might want to spend the summers riding their horse on or fly fishing on and have cattle on it. There's permanent crops, almonds, pistachios, grapes, citrus that they can have that can be on a permanent basis, which all of those things come in different plays. Like another component of this whole piece is, and Bryce is an expert on it, is around the tax side of it, is there's also people that'll come into either direct farm ownership, SMAs, and you can do it. We structure things through REITs typically to try to manage our tax exposure, but there's ways to do a lot of deductions which flow back through to owners, whether it's under 179 in the big beautiful bill, section 180 under soil depreciation, what Bryce does, or different ways. So it can also be a great tax strategy for holding assets. But there's multiple paths to get into farmland, and farmland, I've been chastised multiple times saying farmland's not very liquid. I guess it depends on how you want to really form liquidity, because if you go put a farmland up, you can put a farm on auction and it's going to trade in the next 30 to 45 days and it will sell. There is always a buyer there for it. And so you can get in and get out of farmland, and there's always farmland for sale. We look at about $1 billion worth of farmland plus a year, every single year, of stuff that's on the market that we could acquire. So there's a lot of different paths to get into farmland for someone that's interested in that diversifier.
I feel like we've had an hour-long talk about agriculture, or at least it's been like 50 minutes. And it's like talking to two farmers and two people in the business of agriculture and farming and not talking about regenerative. I got to be cliche and ask about that. What is regenerative agriculture?
I can go first, Justin, if you want.
Go for it.
Perfect. No, we got regenerative certified, and you can take that for what it means. And with the reason we did it is the chip company we're involved with wanted to be regenerative certified, labeled on their bag. So a lot of our corn goes into that chip, and they put that on the label. So we do get a bonus for the regenerative certification. Now, for us, I think regenerative means that we are producing crops without having to be reliable on other people for the most part. Now, we're not at 0%, but regenerative means a rotation where we're not buying all of our inputs. We're not relying on chemicals. Now, we rely on tractors still and things like that. So it's not zero, but we raise a lot of alfalfa. We grow 150 pounds of nitrogen. We place 50 pounds of nitrogen on the field. Alfalfa takes care of our weeds for the most part. It's phenomenal. We grow corn, soybeans, back to alfalfa, and we really down to using two inputs of manure and sulfur and a little bit of lime. So regenerative, I think, means vastly different things to different systems and throughout agriculture. And that's why you don't see one regenerative brand, is because for a cattle producer, it might be different. For a conventional row crop producer, it might be different. But the regenerative definition that we've used on our farm is being able to rely on ourselves rather than third-party inputs.
Bryce, I think it's a great definition of what regenerative is. So I talk to a lot of people that talk about regenerative, and I love to ask, what is regenerative? And everybody has typically got a different answer as to what the definition of that is. And farmers do as well. One farmer will say, well, I use cover crops on part of my farm, so that's regenerative. Another one has got a full integrated livestock program, crop rotation, etc. So there's variance levels to it. I challenge the market a little bit on someone that is a regenerative farmer in Iowa, and maybe they're using cover crops. Maybe they use some manure on their farm to limit their synthetic nitrogen needs. Most of their corn will probably go to the ethanol plant, just like everybody else's. So Bryce has found ways to go find a premium for doing what he's doing, which to me will drive. It's a great reason to drive economics of getting people to make a change in practice. The vast majority of the market doesn't have that offtake opportunity, and ultimately doesn't get an economic benefit from it other than the long-term benefit of improving soil health and reducing less inputs. But I would argue that to say, the old statement, it takes money to buy whiskey. Farmers at the end of the year have to pay the bank back. And so it comes in of, well, what is my cost for putting cover crops? What are my costs for doing this? And if I'm at a break-even basis, it's harder to get people to make that transition over. I think it is a combined piece of ultimately soil health, rotation, what you need to bring outside of the farm versus what you can produce within, and how you can try to break the mold of what is today the 180 million acres of pretty standardized farming in this country. Is how do you break that mold and change it to do something different? The last piece I'd say on regenerative is a lot of people will look at organic and say, well, I don't know if it's regenerative enough because it's organic. And I kind of look at this bar of saying, if this is regenerative, underneath it is your regenerative practices of maybe cover crops and a crop rotation. And then you have organic, where you're using no synthetics, no herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, no synthetic nitrogen, no GMO traits, and a crop rotation that fits that and following a 36-month transition period. And then you get further over to the right and you get ROC, Regenerative Organic Certified, which is even a more stringent classification to get to. I think all of those things are regenerative because they're all good for soil health and what you're trying to achieve. They're just variances to them. And there's also pay scales that come with them.
I want to link this to Las Vegas.
Nice.
That's my segue here. And if you think about Vegas, you're gambling effectively. And farmers are gambling with weather, they're gambling with commodity prices. But let's just bring this to life. Straits of Hormuz there's a gamble right there. 40% of your fertilizer crosses those straits. How are you to, Justin, sort of the prototypic Clear Frontier farm, Bryce, your farm operations, how anti-fragile are you to what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz right now?
Yeah, so it's actually helping us. And I just say that lightly. A lot of the fraudulent organic grain comes in and around that area. And so we're seeing prices increase to what they should be for the work and risk that we're putting on in organic. So
Sorry to interrupt you, but also I imagine it's helping you, but also it's not, because you said manure, sulfur, and I forgot the third thing.
Just manure and sulfur.
And you're protected by that, I imagine, relative to other farmers.
Manure is local, and sulfur comes from Montana or Canada, and it's less than 1% of our operational cost. And so sulfur has gone up. Manure follows nitrogen a little bit, but it's still we don't lose sleep over what's going on outside the U.S. just because we're not affected by it as much on the organic side.
Yeah, it's great insulation today for the operator that's getting manure or compost locally. Fuel, we use fuel, and probably maybe a bit more fuel than the conventional farmers, so there is effect there. But what's happened from both what's going on in the Middle East and really from the tariff standpoint has reduced, because of the tariff, especially on Turkey, has reduced some of the imports that I will argue are predominantly a lot of times fraudulent or not to the same standards of what we produce here. So it's reduced some of that. So it's actually been bullish for us, but I think we're quite insulated in the way we farm and our practices versus a lot of people that are very dependent on it. So it's sad in some ways it's sad from a geopolitical standpoint, but it's great for us from a business standpoint. Do you find yourself an insulation or a way to make money when something like that happens and it's actually benefiting us?
Yeah, and I think not to put too fine a point on that. I mean, I think the anti-fragility aspect of what you all are doing is important, right? From a food security, national security, and economic security perspective. So I'll end with this. I mean, I think I want to thank you both. I think my business partner, Chuck, always says, three of the most important stakeholders in the American system is the military, entrepreneurs, and farmers, in no order. And so, thank you for, what you guys do to sort of, and your whole cohort for sort of feeding the world and for what you're doing to plot the next 30 years.
Thank you for tuning in to the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2ginvestments.com.